Our next speaker is a gentleman called Christopher Kai. He's going to share why stories are 22 times more effective in building rapport in sales, and why 74% of your success in sales boils down to just two things. He's the world's leading authority in story-based leadership, a Fortune 100 global speaker, and a #1 global best-selling author with clients in 100 cities, 24 countries, and 5 continents. He's a former business strategist at American Express, and tech visionary Elon Musk once exclaimed during an interview, "Wow, you really know a lot." Ladies and gentlemen, would you please put your hands together and welcome Christopher Kai.
Thank you, David. That woman's gonna dance soon. So let's start with a story. A little baby boy named Paul. He's born out of wedlock. His mother is a 23-year-old student named Joanne, and his father is a 23-year-old foreign student. We'll call him John. Now, if it wasn't hard enough to have an unwanted pregnancy at age 23, her father and her don't get along because her father does not like John, nor the relationship, so he forbids them from getting married. But she thinks about this. She's about to have her first baby. What's the best thing for my child, she thinks. And she says, you know what? I have to decide to give my baby boy up for adoption. So she goes to the adoption center, doesn't tell her father or her boyfriend, and says, I want 3 categories of this couple that adopts my baby boy, Paul. I hope that they are wealthy, well-educated, and are Catholic. The adoption center sees the couple that she wants, introduces the couple to Paul. They fall in love with Paul. But at the very last minute, they decide, you know what? We actually don't want a baby boy anymore. We actually want a baby girl. So Joanne is a bit upset and disappointed, but thankfully for the adoption center, they find another couple, and this couple falls in love with Paul again, and they love Paul. And as Joanne's signing the adoption papers, she stops and pauses and asks the couple about themselves, and she finds out that this couple not only is not educated, they're blue-collar workers, not wealthy, and are not Catholic. So she's like, I can't do this. But this couple implores her, look, we're going to raise Paul as our own son, and we promise you that Paul will go to college. So Joanne thinks about her situation. She's 23 years old, unwed, doesn't know what to do. So she says, you know what, this will be the best path for my son, Paul. So Paul now has a new family, new parents, new life, new home. Early on, though, his adopted mother points out that it was a bit challenging, and she questioned, was this the right decision for us and our family? But over time, Paul got a little better, even though he didn't do as well in school, but he had a really great connection with his adopted father. His adopted father was a handyman kind of guy, and he would help Paul understand how to build things from scratch. If they wanted to build a cabinet, they would build it from scratch. If they wanted a fence, they would do it themselves. And as Paul got older, he graduates high school, actually goes to college, and when he's in college, he goes to Reed College. And when he gets there, he realizes, just like his past experiences in school, he doesn't like it. He's not inspired, he's not motivated. So what does he do? How can I use my mother's hard-earned money, my mother and father's hard-earned money, when I'm not learning anything? So he quits college and starts dropping into schools and classes that he likes, and the class he drops into is a calligraphy class. Now at the time, at Reed College was most well known for their calligraphy, so he had this beautiful sense of design, not knowing that that class that he dropped into, not knowing the lessons he learned from his father, would carry along with him and his company. This man, Paul, at age 21, starts a company called Apple. Paul's full name is Stephen Paul Jobs. If you look at Steve Jobs' life for the first 20 years, no one would have said, yeah, this guy is going to be amounting to something. When you think about his life, for the first 20 years, he's literally given up for adoption, doesn't do well in school, graduates high school with a 2.65 average, and drops out of college. But when he's 21, he starts a company called Apple, where in time, Apple will be the only company that becomes a $1 trillion company. So next time you hold your phone in your hand, that iPhone, remember that this iPhone is a story about Steve Jobs. Remember that the man who created this phone should not have existed. The man is no longer here now, obviously, but his legacy is literally in the palm of your hand. That's the power of a story. So I'm going to dive into why story-based sales are so powerful, some of the companies that use these stories to improve their brand image, the science of a sale, what kind of stories you want to share, how to become an actual outstanding communicator, lastly, practical things you can use, and we all have a superpower that we all have, and I encourage you all to use that superpower more often. So I found the most convoluted definition of a sales online. And what I want you to focus on is really what I highlighted, which is the direct interaction. Now, direct isn't really direct anymore now. Is it a text message? Is it an email? Is it a LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram? Direct will always be in person, ideally, on the phone or video chats, because that's the best way you can actually have an interaction and a direct interaction, because it's so easy for us to send that email or text message. But you'll never get that visceral feeling of human contact if you don't have these types of events. And so the whole presentation today will be about how to use stories to build that rapport. Now, if you don't use stories, which are 22 times more memorable than facts, you unfortunately might be forgotten. And what I mean by that is, there's a guy named Hermann Ebbinghaus. He's a German psychologist. He found about our memories that we forget 40% of what we learned in 20 minutes, which is why TED Talks are under 20 minutes long. But after a day, we forget more than 70%. And think about this. Yesterday, what conversations do you remember? But if I ask you the same question, what stories do you remember from yesterday, or last week, or last month of last year? The ones that are most powerful, you'll remember for a lifetime. So what I'm going to do is help you understand what stories to share with your clients so that you can build a better rapport and improve your sales process. So let's talk about some of these bigger clients that use their stories. Just to name Apple. Back in the 70s when Steve Jobs created Apple, computers were a bit scary for people. So what do you do when you have consumers that might be scared off about your product? Well, you create a name based on a fruit that's kind of sweet called Apple. But he's also a fruitarian, so he liked eating fruits. But most importantly, he actually used to work for Atari, and back then when they had phone books, Apple was before Atari. That's a little basic story about Apple. If you look at someone like Walt Disney, Walt Disney goes to Tivoli Gardens, for any of you that are Danish in the room. I highly encourage you to go to Tivoli Gardens. It's the second oldest amusement park in the world. He goes there. He's so inspired by what he sees there. He's jotting down all these notes. He takes that story of Copenhagen, Denmark, brings it back to the States, and creates Disneyland. And lastly, you have this guy, Howard Schultz, former CEO of Starbucks. In 1983, he goes to Milan, Italy. He sees the baristas and the customers, and they see this amazing interaction and connection. And so he comes back to the States and creates Starbucks. Because think about this. Do you really want to go to a coffee shop or go to an Italian experience and have a person called a barista serving you a coffee, and it's not a small, medium, or large, it's like a tall or grande? But it's all about this Italian experience where otherwise it's just a coffee shop and not an actual store you could feel about. Because at the end of the day, when you look at brands that inspire the world, and the reason why even Steve Jobs created the whole Think Different campaign, he looked at a company like Nike and saw how a Nike company can use a commodity like a sneaker, but when they find athletes like a Michael Jordan and create that emotional experience, it's no longer just a product they're buying, it's an experience that they're having. And so when you look at these brands, there's an emotional appeal that they have. And so when you look at yourself and discover, the question that I want to ask you is, how do they feel about Discover? Now, this whole morning, you learned about the product type stuff and the macro vision, but how do they feel about Discover? And more importantly, how do they feel about you? Because you represent Discover. And the reason why this is so powerful and important, based on research, your effectiveness as a communicator and as a persuader is based on 10% ethos, which is from a credibility standpoint. If I say I've been doing this for 18 years, I've given 1,000 presentations, I used to work for American Express, that's great, whoop-de-la-do, but that's just the credibility part. The logos are all the facts and figures. When I say, hey, you might want to learn stories more because it's 22 times more memorable, and if you don't, you'll be 70% forgettable in a day. That's based on research. But the single most important thing, no matter how rational and logical we think we are, is the pathos, which is the emotional appeal, where if your client does not feel good about you, then how are you going to actually offer a product that they might like or want? So just keep in mind that no matter how logical we think we are, it goes back to this human nature that Aristotle knew 2,000 years ago, that if you want to persuade people more, it's about that emotional appeal you have with the person standing across from you or the person sitting across from you. And if you think about stories as gift-wrapped presents, who wouldn't want to be in a conversation and every single time you drop a story or hear a story, it's like a present? It's going to be more fun that way, and it's visually more appealing, and it's more emotionally compelling. This is the guy I mentioned before. His name is Herman Ebbinghaus. If you look at the chart, literally, after just 20 minutes, we've gotten close to 40%. After a day, it's 70%, and after a month, it's like 80%. Now, I was reading a survey, a decision journey from McKinsey. They studied 20,000 customers. Now, though you're working with businesses are part of our people, our employees and consumers, but the point is the process is still the same. So if they studied 20,000 consumers out of 5 industries and 3 continents, and they found that you have the initial, okay, let me figure out what this brand's about, then you have, okay, I'm going to decide on this brand or that brand, but the last part of it is the final close of the sale. And they found that 43% of your success is based solely on the interaction between you and the client. And this is super interesting. 31% is based on consumer-driven marketing. The simplest example is this. If you go to a new city, you want to eat at an Italian restaurant, you can look at the Italian restaurant's website, the menu, the pretty pictures, but the thing you'll probably look more toward is the Yelp reviews. And if you see like a 4.8 stars and all these great reviews and details, you're like, wow, I think I like them more. And that's because it's consumer-driven or client-driven. And so when you add it all up, it's very refreshing to know that 74% of your success is based solely on your interaction with a client and how you utilize client-driven marketing. 74%. And that's phenomenal because no matter what's going on in your company, if there's reorgs, if your boss is here or isn't there, or your colleagues, whatever is going on, if you know that your success is based on you, 74%, that's very liberating. So let's dive into 3 types of stories that you want to share and listen to. And I'll use myself as an example. First, you have the personal story, the professional story, and then client-based stories. So the most basic thing about storytelling is this. If you look at this piano, you can think about the boom whacker before, or you can think about that any basic story has a certain progression, a certain narrative. You have low points and high points. There are no really inspiring stories if there are no low points or high points. You look at someone like Oprah Winfrey. She was born poor, black, in the South at the time. She was ridiculed at her job when she was a reporter because she cried too much, she was too emotional. But eventually created this massive empire. Now she's one of the most successful and influential people in the world. In my case, my own personal story is this. My very first memory as a kid was my teacher, a person that I looked up to, looking down at me and saying, "Christopher, shut up." Now, of course, they didn't say that, but they implied that when I talked a lot. And they said, "Christopher, you're staying after class, and you're going to write 'I will not talk in class' 100 times, and 200 times. And my 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. McArdle, bless her heart, she was so angry at me that she said, "Christopher, you're going to stay after class and write 'I will not talk in class' 500 times. And so for a kid that was 8 years old, writing this on the board, and now, many, many years later, after having that punishment in school, being ridiculed for being a slow learner, being the shortest kid in my class, this is a picture actually of my 8th grade graduation, to one day speaking around the world, it just blows my mind that dreams are possible. And on my free time, I started a homeless youth program where I interview people from all around the world, including Elon Musk, to help these homeless kids that live at the largest shelter in the country about career and life skills. So the power of a story is low points, high points, the transition, and how that relates to your professional aspect is if you can be that transition point where your client was here, you help them get through that transition, and now they're here, it's all about keeping it super, super, super basic. We have all this data, we have all these analytics, we have all these products, that's all important, but if you don't keep the story basic, they're going to lose you, and you're going to lose that sale. So the most basic thing about a sale is low points, high points, transition, how do you help along them do that journey to where they want to go. So from a professional standpoint, I was very young as an entrepreneur. I would sell portable handheld fans and rake leaves and shovel snow. to make $100 in New York City shoveling snow as a 7-year-old was like being a millionaire. And then when I was in my early 20s, I said, you know what? I'm going to write a book. So my first company was called Visionary Publishing. And then it migrated to KGL Consulting and Publishing, which KGL stands for the 3 people I most respect in life, which is King, Gandhi, and Bruce Lee. And then the most recent iteration of my company is called the Maven Group. And Maven is just a made-up word that I created. Maven stands for Mondays at the Mission, which is the homeless youth program I started at a shelter 9 years ago. But it reminds me that any person I talk to on my team, any client that I work with, any person I meet in the world knows that Maven represents who I am. I'm a businessman, but I always want to believe that my intention is about service. But notice how there's a big story behind that. So think about that. Now, for yourself, your very name, Discover. You have some of these other credit card companies. They're not verbs. But if you think about that, discover is the perfect verb to use. Discover a new path, discover a partnership. Now, you can't like overplay that, but it's just a great word to use that it's an active word. That's why Steve Jobs says, think different. It's an active verb. But when you look at your overall branding, the fact that you're already one of the top 4 credit card companies in the world, and you're like the new kids on the block because American Express has been around for 179 years, but just know that you have that great sense of pride and foundation, but also all the things you've heard today, look at it as a menu. You have to decide, what do your clients want to sink into relative to what they want to learn? Do they want to learn about the macro trends that Diane talked about? Do they want to learn more about the specific product trends that some of your colleagues talked about? But just make sure that you talk about the stories that they want to hear, and it's about them, as opposed to just sharing this massive product line, because otherwise they're just going to lose you. So when you think about your brand, think about how you as a person connect to your brand. So a specific example. The first guy I met here, his name is Mark. He works at Pulse. And when I asked Mark, hey, what do you think about Pulse? He's like, oh, man, I love this brand. This is an amazing place. I've worked there for 10 years. So you can already tell just based on his mannerisms that he was really passionate about Pulse. And then I said to Mark, whoa, Mark, if I meet your boss, I'm going to tell her, give him a raise. So if Annette, you're here, give him a raise, because he conveyed your brand very well, and he did it very just naturally and organically. So keep that in mind. It's all about the emotional appeal that you have to your company. Because think about this. If you were just to share all the product lines and what you do, but you haven't built that rapport, and they don't really like you, or they don't really feel that you actually like your brand, how is that going to be credible or competent? So keep that in mind that you have to establish that trust first and the competency next. So this is an example of how I utilize my client stories. Earlier this year, I was in Zurich. There were 1,500 executives in the audience. They had 167 speakers, including a Stanford professor and the co-founder of Rolling Stones and the president of Switzerland. And so when I asked the founder, hey, Stefan, what do you think of my speech? They said, actually, I didn't have a chance to look at it because I was busy running around. But he said that a McKinsey partner said that after hearing you, he felt that I elevated it to a TED Talk level conference. And I was like, wow, that's very humbling. But what I'm saying is, if my product is as a speaker, and you can say, oh, this guy, I'm a good speaker, whatever it might be. You can go on my website, you can watch the photos, you can look at the videos. But if you hear other people saying that as third-party proof, it just makes it so much more powerful. And based on research, it's 31% more effective. So remember that. You can talk about your product, but if you don't share your client stories, it becomes more challenging. And to be very specific, I was looking online, doing some research about your brand. I found this marketing video that you had where Roger spoke and Diane spoke, which is great to build that credibility and foundation. But then you have Sally, who's one of your clients, effusively talking about how amazing you are. But what I would encourage you to do is have at least 3 stories minimally. You have one story where your client has no idea what you do, isn't really sure what you do, so you have that story where you talk about how amazing you carry them along their journey. Then you have the actual client stories where they kind of know who you are, but are still deciding on the competitors, but then you carry and find examples of clients you've worked with in the past that also you carry them along their journey. And lastly, some of the actual sales you have, they know who you are, they love you, but that's about more managing expectations. But if you have multiple stories about how someone like Sally is effusively talking about your brand, about your product line, it becomes less about product and more about the person. And if they like the person, they're more likely to buy the product. But it's all about that emotional appeal. The single question you want to ask yourself is this: is your story outstanding? The very word outstanding, it's so simple, but does your story stand out? And again, everything I tell you, just challenge me and ask yourself last week, last month, last year, what stood out in your conversation? Because if you're going to forget 70% in a day, a lot of things are not going to stand out, right? So the very basic term or basic question, is it outstanding? Whatever conversation you have, whatever story you have, especially with your clients, does it stand out? You can have a general comment that your client made, like, oh yeah, Pulse is great. But if you have a more specific comment saying, you know what, my company was near bankrupt, I had to lay off a lot of employees, and because of the partnership I had with Discover, they totally revamped my entire company, built the foundation, and now we're massively scalable and more successful. But it's about the depth of the story and how extreme the low points and high points are. But the most important thing, keep it simple. We all know about stories, but I'm talking about the science. One simple question, is it outstanding for your personal, professional, and your clients? So this is going to be the Jedi Master portion of my speech. This is how crazy this is. If you want to really build rapport, remember this acronym. You focus on relationships, obsessions, passions, and look at certain specific external cues. And so what I mean by this is this. I have a speaking bureau. They're pretty much agents for speakers. I had a meeting with one of them last August. I go in the meeting. I meet Esther, who is the co-founder. There are 2 salespeople in the room, 3 people online, and my main thing was I want to share with them what I do as a speaker. I talk about leadership, team building, sales, networking, connections. And so as I'm listening to Esther, I ask her, the foundation of any of my speeches is all about how do we connect and communicate better based on science. And instead of asking people, hey, what do you do for a living? You can always say, well, who's the one person you most enjoy spending your time with? Now, some people openly tell you who they like hanging out with, but in this case, I wanted to tell them or show them specifically how I go about communicating with people, how I go about building relationships. So I said, Esther, who is the one person you most enjoy spending your time with? And she said, as she tilted her head down, smiled, lowered her voice, and said, my husband, Gil. Now, it was very slightly, I'm overemphasizing it now, but I asked her one simple question. Who is the one person you most enjoy spending your time with? And she's like, my husband, Gil. And so I asked her, hey, Esther, what do you like doing with Gil? Like, do you like going to movies, going to plays, going to dinner? And she talked a little bit more. Now, if I was only talking to Esther, I would have just kept talking about Gil over and over and over again, going deeper and deeper and deeper. And we're building this crazy, amazing connection where, since I had other people in the room, I didn't do that. But that's for the relationship part. So find out who is the one person or the dog or cat that they most want to be around, because that's something that it saves you so much time to think about, what do I want to talk about? What should I say? But if you focus on relationships and then obsession and then next the passions, it just keeps it easier. And I'll dive into the actual science of it and how we actually chemically change. But another example is this. One of my former high school classmates I have known for 20 plus years, I recently saw him again in Miami. He used to be very passionate about ping pong, but I didn't know that it kind of turned into obsession. So I said, hey, Maurice, let's meet up again and let's go play some ping pong. He said, yeah, it'll be cool. Come to my apartment. I'm like, all right. In Miami, there's a lot of apartment complexes that have a lot of amenities. And so I thought, okay, maybe he has the ping pong table in his apartment complex in those shared areas. But when I get there to his apartment, I knock on the door, I walk into his apartment, and the ping pong table is actually in his apartment. And it's not that big of an apartment. So the first thing I see is him. I say hi to Maurice. I haven't seen him in like 20 years. And then I see a couch on the right-hand side, a very large open space, not this. And on the left-hand side, I see the TV screen. And there's this big, massive, folded-up ping pong table on the left-hand side. And after saying hi to Maurice, I thought to myself, man, his wife is a keeper because she allows her husband to have this massive ping pong table in their living room. It was like insane because he's clearly obsessed with ping pong. So we break out the table, we're putting it into the living room. He has it exact spot marked on the living room floor. He has an exact racket he uses. He has rackets for his guests to use if they're beginner, intermediate, or advanced. He has one of those like shooting things, like a tennis ball shooter, but he has a ping pong shooter. And then he even has like this clear through cylindrical thing where it allows him to pick up ping pong balls. So if I wanted to sell something to Maurice, I would just talk a lot about ping pong and obsession because his eyes lit up, his whole animation just changed. And then I'm like, yeah, ping pong is amazing. And I'm like, hey, you want to buy a smartphone? But But the point is, like, I'm building rapport through what he's obsessed with and then talking about my products. What many of us do is we talk about how amazing our products are and what we're doing and how great we are. But if you haven't built a rapport, the foundation, it won't matter. Now, lastly, I got rid of my car about 3 years ago, so I Uber everywhere. So one of my Uber drivers, his name was Marvelous with 2 L's. And normally in Miami, you hear a lot of Latin music. You hear a lot of Latin reggaeton. I don't know what they're saying, but it's fun. It's like my happy music. But I get in this car one day, and Marvelous is playing this music. I don't really recognize the type of music. It's kind of like reggaeton, but not really. So I'm like, hey, Marvelous, what kind of music is this? Asking questions about their interest. He's like, oh, it's called Afrobeat. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's cool, man. It's a good vibe. And I'm like, where's it from? He's like, it's from Nigeria. Oh, you're from Nigeria? Oh, yeah. So I start talking, asking questions about them. But I can hear his tone of voice. But at one point I say, man, this kind of music, if you're a single guy, you play this music, I'm sure girls like it. And as soon as I said girls and Afrobeat music, he's like, had this like, like he had like this, like the weirdest laugh. And I'm like, and so I want to test this again, right? So I talk to him some more, tell me about Nigeria, what do you like about Miami, what do you like about the United States? And then again, I drop the thing again. So man, this Afrobeat, and you must like just love, like girls must love it. And he's like, so I did that 2 or 3 times across a 20-minute Uber ride. But what I'm saying is, the power of this is this is not my opinion. This is almost scary how well it works. There's 4 happy chemicals: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. When you start listening more, when you start looking at these external cues, whether the way they say things, not what they say, but the way they say things, their body language, with Marvelous, when he had that laugh, I'm like, whoa, this guy's cool. But every single time he said the laugh, what's going on is he's literally feeling happier. Oxytocin is a love hormone where it's either like hugging or when you're making love. Serotonin, the good mood. 90% of serotonin actually comes from the gut. So there's not a coincidence that when you're eating meals, breaking bread together as a family or friends or colleagues, you're literally feeling better. And then endorphins are just the runner's high. So when you think about this, if you get someone to smile, like these women here, or Marvelous, or Esther, or my friend Maurice, you are literally chemically changing them. You're literally, if you get someone to smile, the dopamine level is going up, the serotonin, endorphins, cortisol is the stress hormone, it goes down, the immune system goes up, but you're literally chemically changing a person you're talking to based solely on the connection, the rapport you have. And all you need to do is get really, really, really good at listening and watching those external cues. It's not about what people say. It's about how they say it, and the body language is so important because if you don't do that, you're going to be missing out on so many opportunities, and it really is like a Jedi mastery skill. I've done this all around the world with C-level executives, with people that are formerly homeless, with salespeople, with anyone, because it's all about themselves, not you. If you ask questions about them, their relationships, their obsessions, their past, and just keep asking open-ended questions, you'll be shocked and amazed at how insanely powerful this is because you're building this deep connection, but it's not just a connection, it's like a chemical reaction. It's physiological, it's just ridiculous. And so about communicating, we talked about how, okay, you share these types of stories, personal, professional, client stories, but how do you communicate better? What you don't want to do is this. I was at a conference last month in Toronto, and there were a lot of visitor bureaus there, and their sole job in this visitor bureau was to welcome other businesses like meeting planners and other businesses to do business in their city or state. And when I'm walking around this various trade show, I'm meeting some of these visiting bureau professionals, and they had the worst body language, they're closed off, they had frowns on their faces, they weren't smiling, they weren't very expressive, they sounded so boring. I'm like, you are a visiting bureau, and your posture is like this, and you have no excitement in your voice. Like, you don't have to be over-animated like a Tony Robbins, but you need to at least have some enthusiasm and intention in your voice because it's not what you say, it's how you say it, because that's 40% of your effectiveness. Most importantly, it's the body language. If I tell you something as simple as, I like cookie and cream ice cream, just words. But if I say, I like cookie and cream ice cream on Beverly Drive, south of Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills. But then I say, I love cookie and cream ice cream. Now, of course, you're not going to over-dramatize this, But if you want to be a better communicator, you have to be outstanding. And if you want to be outstanding, you have to stand out from the conversation. These things are simple, but simple means nothing if you don't apply it. But most importantly, you watch for the external cues of what they're saying. If they're laughing, that's a super important cue. Now, it's a little harder when people have more of a poker face. But even when people have a poker face, there are certain things that people say over and over and over again. And if you just focus on what they talk about, relationships, obsessions, and passions, you'll be so amazed at how powerful it is to build a rapport. The next level aspect of communication skills is this guy named Uncle Warren. Warren Buffett once said that if you want to be really successful in life, you have to learn public speaking. It's an asset that will lead you to 50 or 60 years of success. It's a liability if you don't know it. Now, I'm going to share a little quick secret. I'm going to call out Uncle Warren. He lied because he learned public speaking when he was 20 years old. He's now 88, so his public speaking skill lasted him 68 years. Now, the reason why I mention this is because most people don't like public speaking. But think about this. We all know him as this Oracle of Omaha, one of the smartest guys in the world, great investor, great entrepreneur. But think about that. When he was in his 20s, he had to convince someone very wealthy to take their money, to put it in his pocket, to invest their money to grow and make more money as investments. We forget that though he is who he is now, for a 20-something-year-old young man or woman to be a salesperson at this level takes a certain skill set. So you can know about stories, you can know about communicating, but if you want to one-up your level of being a better salesperson and a better communicator, you have to learn how to be a better public speaker. And it's just basic things like understanding what a story is. But Warren Buffett is the perfect example of how if you ever watch him speak, he's like always laughing and joking and talking about he like eats at McDonald's every morning. If you ever watch the documentary on HBO and he like spends I think like $2.47 on his breakfast. But the point is, if you watch that guy, he's like really funny, very cordial. But the undertone is he's building trust, building rapport, and now like give me some billions of dollars so I can invest it in other companies. But again, the sequence is important. You can know what I'm talking about, but you have to build a rapport first. So to summarize what I've talked about today, stories are 22 times more memorable than facts. 31% of your sales is based on client-driven marketing. Again, you go to a restaurant, do you want to look at the restaurant website, or do you want to look at the Yelp reviews because that's so much more important? 43% is about your interaction, where again, you're the salesperson, that person's the buyer, that immediate interaction. 65% is about the pathos. What kind of emotional appeal, what kind of emotional response are you getting when you talk about Discover as a brand, but really you represent the brand, so it's really about what do they feel about you. And that's why this is super important. If we're all more self-aware of ourselves, and I do this myself, I literally, since I have online programs on where I teach people how to become a better speaker, I literally would shoot videos on Facebook. And I would watch myself sharing a story on Facebook, but I would also mute myself. And what I do this for is because if I don't mute myself, I'm just listening to the words. But if I mute myself, if I look like really angry, I will literally delete my video, re-record it, and watch it again and mute myself. And if I'm like, just on body language, you're like, oh, okay, maybe I want to listen to what this guy's saying. But if I mute myself and I see myself like, just on the body language, because we're so quick to judge. So in terms of this whole interaction, it's about, are you being honest with yourself? Have you ever actually recorded yourself in the mirror or using video where you actually hear yourself in terms of how you sound? You see yourself in terms of how you look. It's important to have that self-awareness because you can say, Chris, I know all this stuff, but knowing is not enough. You have to apply it. And the only way you can apply it is if you actually objectively have a sense of self-awareness, want to improve, and therefore if you listen to your tone of voice and watch how you look in terms of what you're wearing or what your appearance is, it'll allow you to have that 43% based on your interaction in terms of the better rapport. 65%, I've talked about that already. 93%, this is something that I often hear most of the time where they can read a script, they can talk about the words. There was actually a president of a country where I spoke on the stage, and I literally didn't even remember one word he said, because he just read from a script, complete monotone voice, was not inspiring, didn't have stories, and yet he was the president of an entire country. So remember that if you want to be more successful as a salesperson and communicator, 93% is based on your tone of voice and your body language. Last two is your story. Just ask that simple question. Wherever you go, you have your personal story, professional, client story. You're not going to always, mind you, be able to share your personal story all the time or share your professional story, but it's more about what do you have in your wheelhouse of success, what do you have in your well of success that you can pull out at any time you want. And more important is listening to what their stories are. And lastly, this is the Jedi Master. Like I said, if you were only to focus on the rope of rapport, and R stands for what? O stands for? P, E. External cues. If you learn that one point, rope of rapport, you will literally save yourself so much time. You'll know what to say, more important, what to listen to. But if it's based solely on building rapport, which is more than 40% of the success of sales, talking about those client marketing things, and you'll notice I repeat myself a lot only because if I don't do this, tomorrow you'll forget this. Next year you'll definitely forget this, right? But it's all about using things that have been proven through science, battle-tested, and if you focus on that rope of rapport, it'll be so much more fun as well. So going back to how gratifying is it to know that 74% of your success is based on just you. There's a guy named Daniel Pink. He wrote a book called Drive, The Surprising Things That Motivate Us. And he found that the three things beyond money and incentives that motivate us are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. If you know that 74% of your success is based on just you, you can't blame anyone. If you know that you want to get better at being a communicator or a salesperson or just a better person, that's mastery. And lastly, purpose. Of course we want to make more money, but what's the purpose behind you building these partnerships? Hopefully you want to help them do more, do better with their company, but the purpose is what most inspires people, which is why millennials, they love the fact that it's not just about the paycheck, it's about the lifestyle and the purpose they live toward, and it's moving more and more toward that. So it's just a very liberating thing to know that 74% of your success is based solely on yourself. So let's talk about daily practical application. You're going to have lunch in a few minutes. If you want to apply this, first think about, okay, Christopher talked about storytelling. Basics of storytelling is low points, high points, transition. In my case, low points, I got punished, teased, bullied as a kid. Transition was my uncle hired me at his insurance company when I was 12, and from there it gave me the confidence to build my own company in time. High points, I already kind of shared that with what I do for a living and writing books and whatnot. If, let's say, you don't have personal stories or professional stories or even client stories to share, think about basic things like, did you know that in just 3 days, July 20th, 1969, 50 years ago, we sent the first 2 people to the moon. Now, as Americans, or as human beings, we can just say, oh yeah, that's interesting, Chris. But if you actually shared that with a client to make it interesting, because again, if you're not interesting, you don't stand out. If you don't stand out, how are you going to build rapport? But think about this. We take so many things for granted that in 3 days, there are 400,000 people that allowed 2 people to put themselves on the moon. I mean, that's ridiculous when you think about that. Like, how many people actually knew that in 3 days we're going to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the first moon landing? You know, about 30% of the room. But it's just phenomenal to know that just 50 years ago, when you look at human history, if we've been around for 100,000 plus years, and in the last 50 years, we've sent the person on the moon, and all the phones we use and the satellites, like all that is based on the things we learned from being out in our space. So if you don't have personal stories, professional stories, or client stories, just think of something interesting that stands out in the conversation. It's outstanding to talk about that. Now lastly, I want to talk about the superpower. I didn't know this at the time. I was born and raised in New York City. But my mother and father were immigrants from Hong Kong. And I didn't know at the time because all I wanted to do as a kid was play sports, ride my bicycle, and play with my Matchbox cars. And my mom's like, nope, you're going to Chinese school. So my 2 older brothers and I went to Chinese school. We went for 13 years. So I did really well in English school, but Chinese school, I just didn't like it because it's really hard. It's not about an alphabet. It's all about memorization. And I had to go there for 3 hours every Saturday for 13 years. I actually got left back 4 times. I don't know how it worked out, but I got left back twice in 4th grade. But not knowing that many, many years later, if I talk about that your superpower is listen, and this character in Chinese means listen, But the thing about Chinese, the characters like Tetris. If you put one character here, it means one thing. If you put another character here and you put them together, it means something completely different. Which is why Chinese is so difficult to learn, because it's not like, I'll learn the alphabet, I'll put these letters together and create a word. I'm like, no. You gotta learn like symbols, memorize the symbols, and based on how the symbols are sequenced, that's the word. Now this word blew my mind. There are 6 elements in this word. In Chinese, it's 我听到你. For those who speak Mandarin Chinese, it's I'm hearing you, I'm listening to you. But what's crazy is, on the top left-hand side, you have the character for ears, which is obvious, right? You're listening with the ears. But right below that, it's the character for king, which is respecting someone when you listen to them. Right above that, to the top right-hand side, it's a character for 10. Right below that is for eyes. So imagine if you have 10 pairs of eyes. So it's eyes looking forward, looking to your left, right, behind you, and above you. Right below that is a character for 1, meaning when you're listening to someone, is your phone out? Is your laptop out? I mean, how many times have you been in a meeting or in a conversation or at a meal where someone's on the phone? Oh, I just need to check a quick text. But you're not really listening to that person if you're not undivided, focused on that person. It seems so simple, but it's almost like you're cheating yourself in that moment. But the most important thing about this character is on the bottom right-hand side is the character for heart. Now, what crazy savant genius person that created this character many thousands of years ago in China knew that to listen is a multi-sensory thing? It's listening with the ears, your 10 eyes, respecting someone with 1 undivided attention, but most importantly, it's the heart. That's why this whole entire time, for those of you who are overly on the logical side and analytical side, you're like, oh my gosh, this guy keeps talking about emotion. We still have reptilian brains. And the reason why the people that most connect with you, they feel that you really care. And so when you want to listen to someone, do your best to respect them, to be 1 undivided attention to them, and to listen with your heart. That's your superpower. So I'm going to end with one final thing. I want you to remember this. When you take out your phone and you look at this iPhone, remember Steve Jobs' story. Remember the power of a story, but most importantly, think about what legacy you want to leave in our world. Thank you so much.